Hello guys, welcome back to Anime Moments. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Against the Gods based on novel. So let's start explanation. The Elder and Pavilion Master level people were all near the Great Assembly Hall, and ones who came to stop Yun Che from continuing to attack Fen Duanhuan and Fen Moji were all nearby disciples with the profound strength of Spirit Profound Realm and Earth Profound Realm. But enemies of this level simply didn't possess the slightest bit of threat to Yun Che. Yun Che put away the Snow Phoenix and allowed his body to be submerged by the burning heavens flames without caring. His entire person plummeted down, and without even looking below him, the dragon fault smashed violently downwards with a berserking cry. Boom! The entire burning heaven clan's ground began to distinctly tremble. Accompanying a burst of miserable screams that shook the heavens, burning heaven clan disciples within 30 meters of radius all flew outwards, with the furthest flying hundreds of meters away. When they landed, they were either heavily wounded and unable to get up, or had died right then and there. The moment Yun Che landed, his figure turned into a dash of flowing light, and like a sharp blade, he plunged into burning heaven clan's army that flooded at him. Carrying the howling noise of a descending hurricane, the dragon fault smashed down. Boom! Another huge explosion resounded as burning heaven clan's ground shook once again. Under this single sword strike, over 100 disciples instantly turned into spirits of the dead. 2 sword strikes, a mere 2 sword strikes, had already shattered the psychological defense of almost everyone present. If not for seeing it personally, they definitely wouldn't have believed that the extensive shaking of the ground was actually caused by this young man's attacks, and would have only thought of it as natural earthquakes. Even a battle between elder-ranked beings within the sect wouldn't have at all possessed such a force. There were no ordinary people within Burning Heaven clan, even average disciples here could be considered instructors in the outside world. Yet in front of him, they became stretches of corpses under a single sword strike. Anyone that wants to die, feel free to come. With a furious roar, Yun Che swung the heavy sword out and back. With every single swing of the heavy sword, at least over 30 Burning Heaven clan's disciples would always be blasted flying away. Let alone blocking his attack, these experts in Spirit Profound Realm and Earth Profound Realm couldn't even endure the residual energy wave of his attacks. For a moment, everyone within the Burning Heaven clan could feel the quaking of the earth, the howling gale of a hurricane, and the rumbling of a crashing thunder, as well as the blood, limbs and shards of bones that danced in the air blotting out the sky. Not too far away, elders and pavilion masters in the Great Assembly Hall emerged at the same time. Feeling that surge of terrifying might coming from Yun Che, all of these super strong beings, whose loftiness normally surged to the skies, felt their hands and feet turning ice cold, as their scalp felt an intense numbness. So is that Yun Che? An elder said with a trembling voice. How could there be such a terrifying youth? No wonder he could actually kill Great Elder. Yet his profound energy aura is evidently only at the 6th level of the Earth Profound Realm. Being able to exhibit such a terrifying strength while only being in the 6th level of the Earth Profound Realm, it was simply appalling. Clang 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 clang. Within the chaos, 4 blades burning with profound fire simultaneously chopped down onto Yun Che's back. Yet the sound emitted was that of metal hitting metal. The blade strike that those 4 clearly felt that they had put all their strength into, had actually chopped onto an incredibly hard metal plate and almost caused them to dislocate their wrist from the shock. And looking through Yun Che's cut-open clothings, the revealed skin inside actually only had a few lines of very shallow red marks. Let alone wounds, there wasn't even a drop of blood. The 4's faces became ghastly from fright, and their eyeballs almost popped out on the spot from their shock. Yun Che's counterattack arrived like a tsunami, and with a huge sound, the 4's bodies shattered into several dozens of pieces then and there. The heavy sword's residual energy wave continued forward, and instantly annihilated a dozen more Burning Heaven clan disciples who tried to rush over. Yun Che's body possessed the great way of the Buddha's protection, as well as the Phoenix blood and Dragon God blood's refinement. Not long ago, he also obtained pure marrow of Dragon God himself, and was once again reborn. Even if Yun Che didn't use profound energy to protect himself, his body's toughness still far surpassed everyone's imagination and comprehension. Compared to his extremely overbearing attack power, his body's defense was far more overbearing. It could be said that even if the current Yun Che wanted to die, it wouldn't be that easy. If one were to focus on attacking, then their defense would certainly be somewhat deficient. Heavy sword-style weapons were extraordinarily ferocious, but the openings they leave were also huge, and enemies could easily grasp an opening to launch a fatal attack. Even if one's destructive power was 100 times greater, without enough capability to defend oneself, it would still be useless. Yun Che's attack power was already terrifyingly abnormal, while his defensive power had more so reached an unthinkable extent. Even if he were to stand still, it would still be difficult for these jointly attacking Burning Heaven clan disciples to harm him. This kind of Yun Che, under swamping attacks of Burning Heaven clan disciples, had thoroughly become a slaughter machine that could not be stopped. No matter how strong an expert, they would still fear being overwhelmed in numbers. Thus, in their own territory, Burning Heaven clan never needed to fear anyone. In everyone's eyes, if Yun Che dared to come, then that would be simply throwing his life away. Yet this rule didn't seem to be valid on Yun Che at all. Swarming and attacking him from all sides did not suppress Yun Che in the slightest, but instead was like voluntarily handing over their life for him to massacre. Junior, die? From Yun Che's backside, two strong Sky Profound Realm auras assaulted him simultaneously. Amongst the elders and pavilion masters who had been watching on the sidelines, there were finally two who struck out. Taking advantage of the opening as Yun Che was being surrounded, their two blades combined together, as the blade's tip released a streak of deep purple blade beam, and directly pierced toward the center of Yun Che's back. Boom! Yun Che turned around with lightning-fast speed, and the Emperor Profound Dragon Fault more than 10,000 kilos in weight swung out behind him like a feather that weighed almost nothing. With a loud explosion, the purple-colored blade beam simultaneously released by the two Sky Profound Realm experts was directly pulverized into nothingness as the violent storm from the heavy sword heavily smashed onto the two's chest. In that instant, these two finally understood why every single time Yun Che's sword swung out, it would actually cause the earth to tremble. That was not illusory, not imaginary, because at that moment, they felt as if their chests had been smashed by the Thunder God's hammer from the heavens. The two flew backwards in the same direction, and smashed onto a mountain cliff over 300 meters away. The mountain cliff quaked, and the two Sky Profound Realm experts' bodies that were tougher than even boulders, shattered into a few dozens of pieces at the same time, and mixed together in the process of breaking and falling down. Even if their birth parents came, they still wouldn't be able to tell just which piece belonged to whom. 14th Elder. Pavilion Master Duan Qi. Waves after waves of frightened mournful cries sounded from within Burning Heaven clan, and those elders and pavilion masters' expressions had even more so changed once and once again. They knew the strength of those two extremely well, however, in front of Yun Che, they were unexpectedly so very fragile. 27 elders and 33 pavilion masters, these were the backbone of Burning Heaven clan's power. As for people who could become elders or pavilion masters, their profound strength must all have reached Sky Profound Realm. Which is to say, within Burning Heaven clan, of the Sky Profound Realm experts whom were like legends in the outside world, there was still an entire 60 people excluding Clan Master Fen Duanhuan. The number of Sky Profound Realm experts belonging to Xiao Sect or Frozen Cloud Asgard was definitely no fewer than this as well, while ones belonging to Heavenly Sword Villa could even be counted up to the third digit. This was precisely the mightiness of the four major sects. Excluding the enormous number of all their disciples, just releasing these backbone powers at Sky Profound Realm was enough to wipe out all of the sects apart from the four major sects. Amongst these Sky Profound Realm experts of Burning Heaven clan, including Fen Duanhuan, there were a total of 7 people in later ranks of Sky Profound Realm. All others were at early or middle ranks of the Sky Profound Realm. The strongest was Fen Moli, who was half a step into Emperor Profound Realm. 60 experts of Sky Profound Realm were unquestionably an extremely terrifying number in Blue Wind Empire's profound practitioners' common senses. But behind every single Sky Profound Realm expert, there carried enormous amounts of Burning Heaven clan's effort and resource. The downfall of every single Sky Profound Realm expert would be an extremely huge loss without exception. However, out of all these Burning Heaven clan's Sky Profound experts, 7 of them had been killed by Yun Che at once. 3 of them, Fen Moli, Fen Duansung, Fen Moran, were 3 out of the only 7 late-stage Sky Profound Realm experts Burning Heaven clan had. Adding the 2 people just now, amongst 60 Sky Profound practitioners, 9 had already been annihilated by Yun Che alone. This was a huge loss that the Burning Heaven clan before would have never even thought about, nor even dared to think about in their dreams. The elders and pavilion masters who were gathered together all felt their hearts shudder. Momentarily, no one actually dared to step forward. When Yun Che came, they had initially thought it would be like catching a turtle in a jar, but they did not expect that not only did the bait abducted by shaming the sects on and not lure in a lamb waiting to be butchered, it instead lured in an unimaginably powerful, furious and uncontrollable bloodthirsty vicious wolf. Before they could even harm a single hair on the opponent, they had already lost an elder, a pavilion master, and hundreds of clan disciples. Among them were many of their descendants and kinsmen. Standing halfway on the mortal parting heavenly pavilion's mountain cliff, Fen Jueqing's entire face was convulsing. With his eyes wide, he saw Yun Che being successfully lured in, but what he saw next wasn't him being mobbed and subdued, and instead was a great massacre performed by him. The encirclement and suppression from tens of thousands of Burning Heaven clan disciples instead became a field of corpses within dreary screams and cries after being counter-killed by Yun Che alone. Burning Heaven clan, their own territory, had actually directly turned into Yun Che's slaughterhouse for indiscriminate massacre. When he crashed his bridal escort in the Imperial City back then, he wasn't Fen Duanchang's match yet. It hasn't even been a month, yet his strength had actually grown by such a terrifying extent. Only now did Fen Jueqing become truly aware that Great Elder and the others' deaths were not caused by Yun Che's sly and shrewd methods. They had instead were struck down by true and genuine strength. No. With Yun Che's currently displayed terrifying strength, let alone one Fen Moli. Even if there were 10 of him, they would still be killed. Why is it like this? Fen Jueqing's eyes stared wide, as his teeth kept on making creaking sounds from clenching. On the mortal parting heavenly pavilion, Fen Jueqing's face was also similarly convulsing. Looking at the Yun Che in his view, even his heart almost burst apart a few times from shock. Clan Master, what should we do next? Fen Moji concentrated all his profound energy to suppress his injuries. When he spoke, his voice clearly trembled. This Yun Che. He's simply like a demon god incarnation. He's not even 20 yet, so how could he have such a terrifying strength? Clan Master, how about we? Sound transmit to all elders and pavilion masters right now. Fen Duanhuan covered his chest with his hand, breathing heavily. Start preparing the 9 profound dipper formation. No matter what, we must put him to death today. Hearing the words 9 profound dipper formation, Fen Moji's pupils greatly constricted. Feeling the terrifying might coming from Yun Che, he actually didn't think this decision as exaggerated at all. He forcibly nodded, very well. If the 9 profound dipper formation is used, even if he was 10 times stronger, he would still die with all certainty. All of the ordinary Burning Heaven clan disciples had scattered in retreat, because they all knew that even if they were to go up, they would simply be throwing away their lives. At this moment, those who were besieging Yun Che were all people of the middle-ranked Earth Profound realm. However, them jointly attacking together was practically no different than simply throwing away their lives. Under Yun Che's heavy sword, they were being destroyed in groups like piles of rotten wood. What they had amounted to was at most slightly delaying Yun Che's advancing steps. It had not even been half a quarter of an hour since Yun Che had begun swinging his heavy sword, yet Burning Heaven clan bodies were already piling up on the ground. The prestigious, solemn, and imposingly scorching Burning Heaven clan that was like a sacred place in the eyes of ordinary profound practitioners was riled into a complete mess in such a short amount of time by Yun Che. Fear, screams of misery, and the everlasting wails and howling that seemed to have come from banshees and evil spirits came from all over the area. At this moment, a cold shout suddenly came from a place not so far away. Everyone, pull back. The one who issued the order was Second Elder Fen Moji. Under his command, the Burning Heaven clan members surrounding Yun Che felt as if they heard the voice from heavens. Yun Che's terrifying strength and ruthless methods had already scared them out of their wits long ago. They had forced themselves to charge at him, and immediately after the command was issued, everyone panically retreated like the parting tide. Yun Che motionlessly stood in place. Around him was a field of dismembered bodies that extended to more than a radius of 30 meters. The blood under his foot streamed as though a river, a ghastly sight to behold. If they had not seen this with their own eyes, no one would have believed that the Burning Heaven clan of the 4 major sects had actually been turned into a blood-stained slaughterhouse by a young man of not even 20 years of age. Yun Che did not chase after them, nor did he continue onwards. Around him, human figures quickly moved about one after another, and after they all stopped, they had already made a strange battle formation with him at the center. A total of 30 people surrounded him. Among these people, even the youngest was already a little over 40. The 9 closest people around him were evenly standing in 9 different locations around him, while the 21 standing behind them were distributed unevenly. Another 60 more meters behind them were another 20 people with faces full of grave concentration, yet they did not approach. All of these people were wielding a Burning Heaven blade, and the fire on all of these Burning Heaven blades were all purple in color. Which was to say that the profound strengths of these people were all at least in the Sky Profound realm. Be careful, this is a power-transferring profound formation created by people who have cultivated in the same profound arts. Jasmine's voice suddenly echoed from Yun Che's mind. Her voice contained a slightly grave tone. This profound formation could allow everyone within the formation to concentrate all of their power to those 9's bodies. Not only that, those 9 people getting the transferred power are not fixed, and could swap to anyone attacking you or being attacked by you at any time. This profound formation could only have a maximum capacity of 30 people, it may be less, but no more than that. Even if you kill one among them, those at the back would immediately enter to repair the formation, until they completely suppress and kill you, or drag it on until you are exhausted. Yunche. The sky profound realms of this sect should all be here. HMPH, just to kill you alone, they actually did not hesitate to mobilize all of their sky profound practitioners. Though I'd suppose that you are this sect's greatest enemy in their history. Jasmine said indifferently. Just as Jasmine's voice fell, the surface of the 9 people closest to Yunche suddenly became ablaze. At the same time, their profound energy aura had all instantly increased by several fold. Yunche narrowed his eyes as his gaze swept across everyone before him. Under their feet, there was a faintly discernible image of a flashing formation. An enormous pressure also heavily pressed onto Yunche's body at this moment, making him feel a little threatened for the first time since entering the Burning Heaven clan. 9 profound dipper formation. Feng Juecheng uttered in a low voice while standing in the middle of mortal parting Heavenly Pavilion's mountain pass. His previous overcast expression instantly smoothed out to reveal pleasant surprise, arrogance, and a savage smile, and it's even a 9 profound dipper formation constructed by every elder and pavilion master. Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Yunche, you toast? This time, even if you are 10 times more powerful, you would still be doomed to die without a burial ground. Among the 9 people closest to Yunche, the oldest one, an old man whose beard and hair had all turned completely white, stared fixedly at Yunche, and started speaking with a solemn voice. Yunche, it wasn't until this old man saw it with his own eyes did he dare believe that such a person like you would appear in Blue Wind Empire. With your aptitude, your future would surely be mighty enough to shake the world. But unfortunately, you had overestimated your own abilities and provoked my Burning Heaven clan. You have dug your own grave, cutting off all future prospects. You have no one to blame but yourself. It is unfair for us dozens of people jointly forming a formation to deal with you, but... Shut your old mouth. Yunche smashed his heavy sword on the ground, interrupting that old man's speech with a loud sound as he sneered with mockery. A group of old dogs that kidnap and hold innocent people hostage, despicable to the point where heaven and earth would hold you in contempt, actually would care about being unfair. Bullshit. Yunche's words made the white-haired old man flush with anger. His old face twitched, but in front of Yunche's cold eyes filled with disdain, he was already unable to even say anything to keep up a front. After his whole body trembled all over, he roared in exasperation, "Insolent junior. Die? A group of despicable old dogs actually have the face to bark in front of me, go bark in hell." Yunche's body suddenly exploded forward, and Dragon Fault smashed towards the old man who had just spoke with a thunderous sound. Under the incomparably berserking power, the surrounding air was instantly pushed apart, denting in a faintly discernible circular arc in front of Dragon Fault. The power behind this strike drastically changed the old man's expression, but it instantly returned to calm again. The 9 people around Yunche simultaneously mobilized, as 9 burning heaven blades that came in all different directions brought along heat waves scorchingly hot to the point where even the space was almost melting and assaulted Yunche. Clang! The incomparably loud striking sounds almost shattered everyone's ears. 6 burning heaven blades struck atop of Dragon Fault at the same time, and a surging wave of profound energy instantly exploded outwards. Yunche was knocked 4 or 5 steps back as his wrist felt slightly numb. But the 6 people indirectly in front of him were simultaneously blown flying for at least a dozen meters away. However, they had merely been blown away, and did not sustain any substantial injuries whatsoever. And following Yunche's brief moment of imbalance, 3 streaks of chilling aura rushed at him from behind, and 3 burning heaven blades slashed onto Yunche's back at the same time. PFF. The sky profound realms of this sect should all be here. HMPH, just to kill you alone, they actually did not hesitate to mobilize all of their sky profound practitioners. Though I'd suppose that you are this sect's greatest enemy in their history. Jasmine said indifferently. Just as Jasmine's voice fell, the surface of the 9 people closest to Yunche suddenly became ablaze. At the same time, their profound energy aura had all instantly increased by several fold. Yunche narrowed his eyes as his gaze swept across everyone before him. Under their feet, there was a faintly discernible image of a flashing formation. An enormous pressure also heavily pressed onto Yunche's body at this moment, making him feel a little threatened for the first time since entering the Burning Heaven clan. 9. Profound Dipper Formation. Blood splashed, flying out from Yunche's back as 3 lines of blood marks that were half a foot long and half an inch deep was carved into Yunche's back. The acute sensation of pain came from his back, and also instantly evoked Yunche's ferocious nature. With an explosive howl, Dragon Fault brought along a furious dragon cry as it smashed backwards. Following the loud sound, 3 Burning Heaven blades broke in answer and flew out of their hands. The 3 Burning Heaven clan elders who had injured Yunche were also blasted flying into the distance. Previously, the 6 combined attack had actually completely offsetted his heavy sword's attack. And the attack from the 3 in the back actually had all brought about wounds that were not so frivolous. Yunche tightened his brows as the profound energy in his entire body frantically roiled like boiling water. This battle formation was far stronger than what he had imagined. When Yunche was being slightly shocked, the shock on the Burning Heaven clan's side was instead entirely inconsolable. Though they had injured Yunche in one exchange, not only did 6 people's worth of a combined attack not even gain the upper hand, they instead had all been blasted off by Yunche. The 3 blade strikes that contained all of their strength had actually merely cut open 3 insignificant bloody marks. These 9 people were no ordinary Sky Profound experts. Inside the 9 Profound Dipper Formation, their bodies contained the entire combined power of 30 Sky Profound experts. They simply could not believe that Yunche's power and physique was actually frightening to such an extent. Even though they were incredibly shocked, they still completely believed that once they had activated the 9 Profound Dipper Formation, no matter how much stronger Yunche could be, it was still impossible for him to leave alive today, because aside from the Grand Elder and the Grand Clan Master who had long withdrawn from society, this was Burning Heaven clan's greatest power they could dish out. And when he was inside this formation, the previously always invincible Yunche had indeed been injured in a single exchange. The white-haired old man who had spoken to Yunche previously had nearly dislocated his wrist from being jolted by Yunche's strike. Even though he was shocked in his heart, his expression was not at all frenetic as he said in a stern voice, as expected, "You are indeed strong. No wonder even Great Elder had died in your hands. But once the 9 Profound Dipper Formation is established, no matter how much you struggle, you would still inevitably die today." The 9 people simultaneously went forward, swinging 9 streaks of purple-colored flame dragons from each of their Burning Heaven blades, driving them straight at Yunche. "The ones who will die, you lot!" With a loud roar, Yunche stood in place as the heavy sword's power crazily released, and an explosive, Overlord's Fury, smashed down within a rumbling sound. This strike was actually striking towards all 9 people. Boom! Profound energy exploded as purple flames filled the sky. The surrounding 30 meters or so area of ground had been flattened, as the dismembered bodies everywhere scattered into the distance like dead leaves. The heavy sword's attribute was just this tyrannical. Although this strike of Yunche was smashing against 9 people, these were 9 people condensed with the power of an entire 30 Sky Profound experts. It was a direct confrontation between one person and 30 Sky Profound experts. In the midst of the explosion, all 9 of the Burning Heaven elders were blasted more than 30 meters away. Yunche didn't move at all from his position, but a trail of blood slowly leaked out from the corner of his mouth. In this attack, he had suffered internal injuries. In the entire Blue Wind, aside from Yunche, who could possibly withstand the combined attack of 30 Sky Profound experts? Even though he suffered internal injuries, Yunche's expression was nevertheless still incomparably clear and not the least bit panicked. The 9 Profound Dipper Formation was more troublesome than he had originally thought it was, but if they wanted to defeat him, they better not think that it was this easy. The 9 people who had been blasted off loudly roared at the same time as they went forward again. They were of the same clan, cultivated in the same Burning Heaven arts, so under the Profound Formation, and along with the same profound strength, their movements were even more identical, flawlessly executing their advances, retreat, and constrainment together. Boom! Bang! Clang! Whoosh! The heavy sword's explosive sounds were deafening. A terrible loud sound was brought about each time Dragon Fault was swung, and would simultaneously blast off the 9 people besieging him. However, the 9 would just immediately come back again as an incomparably hot purple blaze came together, firmly sealing Yunche in the middle while suppressing him step by step. As the number 1 battle formation for 1,000 years in Burning Heaven clan, the 9 Profound Dipper Formation's might was not trivial at all. Yunche began to distinctively realize that he had been forced into a disadvantage, as Fen Duanhuan and every Burning Heaven disciple's complexion had finally begun to ease. PFF. Yun Che's left shoulder had taken another attack and the wound was deep enough to see bone. Under the acute pain, Yun Che's ferocious nature suddenly exploded. Like an extremely angry evil dragon, Dragon Fault suddenly chopped towards the burning heaven elder that had cut him. Falling moon sinking star. Die? Bang! The 5 burning heaven blades that blocked in front of Dragon Fault were all instantly shattered. Carrying an extremely ferocious power, Dragon Fault smashed onto that burning heaven clan elder's chest, and blasted out a bloody cavity as big as a person's head from his chest. That burning heaven elder let out a despaired scream as he flew backwards like a cannonball and violently crashed onto another burning heaven elder behind him, shattering his sternum. Sticking together, those two flew out 150 meters away. Elder Mo, Elder Xinghao? Even under the 9 profound dipper formation, another elder was actually killed. This made Fen Duanhuan's heart convulse to the point of bleeding. However, the 9 profound dipper formation wasn't very effective because of this. After Yun Che smashed one dead and another injured, an additional 2 quickly went up to fill the gap, becoming the new profound formation's core. 2 of the Sky Profound experts outside of the formation also quickly joined in, allowing the 9 profound dipper formation still maintain 30 people. Sky Wolf / 9 people once again encircled toward him, yet they were immediately scattered by the Sky Wolf's image that Dragon Fault swung out. The 2 who had just filled in didn't even have the chance to swing out their first strike, before they both became 2 halves under the Sky Wolf / at the same time. What? Fen Duanhuan's entire body trembled, and almost puked out blood on the spot. The powerful profound skill of a true god still allowed Yun Che to easily kill his opponents even under suppression. But regardless whether it was a falling moon sinking star, or a Sky Wolf / they were all accompanied by enormous depletion of strength. Every time these 2 profound skill gets unleashed, it would definitely be able to kill at least one of the opponents. However, opponents could substitute in right away, suppressing him once again. The 9 profound dipper formation's strength never weakened from beginning to end, but every time he used an ultimate move, his strength and oppressive air would decrease somewhat. About this, Yun Che was well aware. But even if he did not use profound skills, every single smash of the heavy sword was still incredibly terrifying. Even though the 9 encircling Yun Che faintly had the upper hand, the hearts of every single one of them were constantly trembling with fear. The sense of dread when Yun Che's Dragon Fault assaulted at them were even more terrifying than that of nightmares. With the Dragon Fault in his hands weighing at over 10,000 kilos, Yun Che's movements were being restrained. Adding on that all the enemies beside him could use the profound floating technique while he couldn't, he had always been unable to escape the 9's joint entanglement. The wounds on his body started to increase, and his body rattled with lines after lines of bloody marks. But he never truly collapsed since the beginning. On the contrary, the people encircling him died one after another under his intermittent eruptions of power. Every time Yun Che's falling moon sinking star and Star Wolf / was unleashed, at least one person would become a corpse on the ground. Moreover, all of these casualties were people at the level of Burning Heaven clan elders and pavilion masters. Every time one died, Fen Duanhuan's heart would shudder a little more. After the 6th one died, his body swayed, as he directly fell onto his knees. Until now, including Great Elder, an entire 15 Sky Profound experts within Burning Heaven clan had lost their lives in Yun Che's hands. 15. Losing 15 ordinary disciples, even averaging late state of Earth Profound Realm, would be inconsequential to the Burning Heaven clan. But losing 15 elders and pavilion masters was an extremely heavy impact to Burning Heaven clan. Even though Burning Heaven clan was ranked as the last of the 4 major sects, they were always confident that their comprehensive power wasn't much weaker than Frozen Cloud Asgard or Xiao sect at all. However, the Burning Heaven clan, after losing 15 Sky Profound experts, had almost lost their qualification to sit shoulder by shoulder with Frozen Cloud Asgard and Xiao sect. Even if they were to successfully kill Yun Che today, such an enormous loss simply couldn't be recovered either. Yet all of this were done by Yun Che and him alone. Fen Duanhuan clenched his teeth tightly, and the knuckles of his fists turned ghastly white from gripping. He felt all the more that provoking Yun Che once and once again had brought the greatest nightmare in Burning Heaven clan's history. If he were to be given a second chance to choose again, he definitely wouldn't have allowed Fen Jueqing to accompany Fen Jubi to the ranking tournament, and when the Elder Council insisted on assassinating Yun Che, he definitely would have tried to stop it with all his power. But he didn't have such a second chance. Moreover, Yun Che's limit seemed to be far more than just this. He had originally thought that since Yun Che only had the profound strength of Earth Profound Realm, his endurance would certainly be very weak, and with heavy sword as a weapon, his exhaustions would be even faster. But he didn't expect that even though the current Yunche was covered with wounds, his heavy sword's might was still incomparably domineering. Although the 9 jointly attacking him had the upper hand, they could never entirely suppress him. Mortal Parting Heavenly Pavilion was located at the highest ground of Burning Heaven Clan, and from there, one could view every corner of the entire Burning Heaven Clan from above. Xiao Lingxi stood by the window, and could clearly see everything that was happening below. Starting from when Yunche appeared, her gaze had always been fixedly focused on him, and could no longer move away again. Looking at him roaring furiously, seeing him swinging his heavy sword, making the pitilessly strong Burning Heaven Clan into a river of blood. Little Che. Little Che, Xiao Lingxi tightly covered her lips, as her entire body trembled uncontrollably. Her pair of charming eyes shimmered with a hazy yet dreamy light. That was the voice belonging to him, and she could even faintly discern his features. However, she could not believe that this was really the little Che who grew up with her, who had always needed her care and protection. Ha! Star-scorching demon lotus! Yunche furiously shouted with a loud voice. A fire lotus exploded on his body, and swept toward his surroundings carrying a heat wave that surged toward the sky. Block it! The instant that Phoenix Demon Lotus bloomed, a surge of heat wave, terrifying to the point of exceeding their imaginations, rushed toward their face. The 9 roared loudly, simultaneously stepped forward while crazily conjuring up all their profound energy, and greeted toward the incoming blooming scarlet petals. The star-scorching Demon Lotus's blooming speed instantly became slower, and started to irregularly sway from the 9 powerful obstructive forces. In the end, it actually slowly stopped blooming. Under an entire dozen breaths of time in stalemate, the fire lotus suddenly directly exploded, scattering down shattered lotus petals all over the sky. The 9 people were also all blasted flying away by the heat wave, everyone's clothes and hair were all mostly burnt, their faces were charred, and their palms were more so gravely scorched. They were all in an extremely sorry state. Switching back to Yunche's perspective, he, who released the star-scorching demon lotus, instantly felt a surge of strong sense of weakness in his entire body. His body slacked, and his entire person knelt onto the ground with one knee. Panting heavily from his mouth, the sweat on his forehead flooded out like a spring, and stains of blood were scattered all over his body. Yunche was evidently already exhausted, yet he could actually still resist to such an extent under the 9 profound dipper formation, and even killed a whole 6 elders. This was already a terrifying miracle, and was more so a nightmare enough to make Burning Heaven Clan remember for generations to come. One could tell that if there was no 9 profound dipper formation, even if all the Sky Profound experts were to flood in at once, they would perhaps all meet their deaths in his hands. Yunche. Your death is at hand, let's see how else you can still act arrogant. Covering his chest, Fenmoji pointed his finger at Yunche and loudly roared. Even though his voice was cold and harsh, anyone could hear the trembling within. Yunche raised his head, and still grabbing onto his heavy sword, yet a hint of a cold smile could be seen at the corner of his lips as he said in a low voice, if all these people were to die, then wouldn't it be all over for your Burning Heaven Clan? Yunche's cold laugh was as gruesome as a vicious demon. His words were more so like the most venomous curse, making even the imposing second elder of Burning Heaven Clan uncontrollably shudder. The muscles on his face convulsed as he pointed his finger at Yunche, and expending his loudest voice, he roared, "You actually still dare to make such insolent and audacious remarks? Elders and pavilion masters, he is already an arrow near the end of its flight, quickly kill him and avenge the kinsman who died in his hands." Devil's Pawn, die? The 9 who were injured by the star-scorching demon lotus all fell back, and another 9 pressed forward at the same time as their 9 burning heaven blades respectively pierced toward Yunche's 9 vital points. Every single one of their strikes, all struck to kill. They wished to doom this terrifying Yunche to death right away. At this moment, Yunche suddenly stood up with Dragon Fault in his hands. An azure-colored mysterious light suddenly released from his eyes. Behind him, an image of an azure-colored dragon suddenly appeared. Dragon, Soul, Domain. Roar? A majestic and overbearing dragon roar descended from the heavens, quaked souls, and flooded the entire world. 3 feet above Yunche's head, a pair of azure-colored eyes that were as ice-scorching as the stars, and as profound as the skies, abruptly opened. The 9 who had been rushing towards Yunche all stopped in their tracks, their expressions changing from malice to surprise. After which, they suddenly morphed to extreme fright. Their eyes began to shrink rapidly and their entire bodies seemed to tremble like leaves in the wind. This was because a dragon had appeared before their eyes. An incomparably large dragon that filled the sky. Its body was thousands of meters long and just its head was as big as a mountain. An aura that was indescribably humongous came bearing down upon them from the sky, and under this large aura, they felt as minuscule as a grain of sand in comparison to the universe. The skies darkened and peals of angry thunder roared down from above, shaking the earth and sending it into a series of trembles. This entire scene was practically as frightening as if Judgment Day had suddenly come. What? 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 What is that? Looking at the frighteningly gigantic dragon before their eyes, and the world before them that had suddenly changed, their limbs grew weak, their bodies shuddered, and their eyes bulged, letting out the loudest screams they had ever shouted in their lifetimes. And the humongous dragon seemed to have heard their shouts of fright. II's large head suddenly descended from the skies as it opened its mouth wide, heading towards them. Ah! A shriek that was filled with extreme fear practically tore through the heavens, and these incomparably strong sky-profound practitioners were like mice caught by a ferocious tiger under such might and fear, unable to resist at all. In their terror, their bodies had become limp, causing them to lose all their strength, leaving them none to even escape. Each of them crumpled onto the ground, clutching at their heads instinctively and letting out extremely miserable and frightened shouts. Bang! A trembling elder of the Burning Heaven clan had his chest pierced through in a strike by Yunche, his eyes staring wide with fear as he was struck down. Bang! A Burning Heaven clan pavilion master who was in the midst of a frightened howl was cut into two with a sweep of the dragon fault sword. Boom! A loud noise sounded, and 4 of the Burning Heaven clan's elders were sent flying in a strike, instantly becoming corpses. The 9 Profound Dipper formation had collapsed altogether, and without the enormous bestowed strength from the Profound formation, their defense was simply laughably weak before Yunche. Within the Dragon Soul domain, and under such immense might, they had totally lost all their fighting spirit. What remained was only fear. Let alone continuing their attack on Yunche, they seemed to even have completely lost their ability to resist and escape. They, who were incomparably strong, were currently just like weak sheep waiting for the slaughter, as they were easily killed off one by one through Yunche's strikes. Outside of the Dragon Soul domain, all those in the Burning Heaven clan were already utterly frightened. All they heard was a dragon's howl, and saw a dragon's shadow appear suddenly behind Yunche. Following which, they saw that everyone encircling Yunche had all stopped where they were, trembling from head to toe, pupils enlarged, and the expression on their faces were as if they were witnessing the most terrifying scene in the world. And it was also almost at this instant, the Profound formation's light suddenly flashed, and the 9 Profound Dipper formation linking all the Sky Profound experts' profound veins and minds, had actually disappeared at once. Yunche rushed out like a wild leopard. Dragon Fault crazily smashed onto one after another elder and pavilion masters. And these elders and pavilion masters all seemed like they were demon-possessed. When facing Yunche, they all collapsed onto the ground with fright, their lives ending in a single sword strike in the midst of their shouts of fear. They did not strike back, nor did they resist. Even after death, their eyes were still opened wide, filled with a fear that seemed as if they were about to enter the underworld. What's happening? What's going on? They were about to see Yunche lose his life under the 9 Profound Dipper formation, but just like a nightmare that suddenly descended, the strong Sky Profound experts from their Burning Heaven clan were actually killed one by Yunche while trembling in place. The Dragon Soul domain was a mental domain, without color nor shape. Beyond the domain, unless a person's mental strength was strong enough, they would not be able to sense anything happening at all. The Dragon Soul domain that Yunche had established was not large, because the larger the area, the more taxing it would be on his mind. It was only just enough to envelop the entire 9 Profound Dipper formation within. The Dragon Soul domain was not a strong attack-based domain, nor was it a control-based domain like the Frozen Cloud domain. Rather, it was a mental domain, the likes of which Yunche had never come into contact with before. He had never thought that the might of the Dragon Soul domain would be frighteningly strong to such an extent, that even these strong Sky Profound realm practitioners would turn into defenseless sheep waiting to be slaughtered, allowing him to take their lives as he wished while they cowered and trembled. Such might was so frightening that even he himself was overwhelmed with deep shock. Although it could not instantly kill people, nor cause bodily harm towards any target, it was still far more frightening than any attack or control domain that Yunche knew of. After all, this was the god's domain from the Dragon God, that could only be activated through the Dragon Soul. However, such a strong domain would also use up an incomparably large amount of profound energy and concentration. Especially so was the amount of mental exhaustion. After a mere 5 breaths of time, Yunche's brain already started to become heavy, and he was showing signs of increasingly strong dizziness. He faintly felt that in his current state, were he to forcefully continue onwards, he would certainly suffer strong mental backlash when he dispel it, and might even go unconscious on the spot. In this 5 breaths of time, an entire 12 Sky Profound experts had their lives ended by Dragon Fault. Overlord's fury. Yunche's figure rushed forward, and instantly arrived at the place most concentrated with elders of the Burning Heaven clan. Dragon Fault violently smashed down, and the Dragon Soul domain, which had been sustained for merely a few breaths of time, was, by then, also lifted. Bang! Several dozen meters of land burst open completely, blasting 6 of the Burning Heaven clan elders flying simultaneously. Under the Dragon Soul domain, not only would their bodies not have the transferred profound energy from the 9 Profound Dipper formation, but even their own profound defense had collapsed under fright. In a strike from Yunche, 6 Burning Heaven clan elders all died, and none were spared. The scene had originally been one of Yunche's impending death, yet in a few breaths' time, it became that of 18 elders of the Sky Profound realm being killed in succession like vegetables being chopped. The sudden change in the situation had made everyone unable to react. A sea of darkness engulfed Fen Duanhue's vision, as he violently sprayed out a mouthful of fresh blood. The Dragon Soul domain was lifted, and the remaining elders and pavilion masters seemed to have suddenly been awakened from a nightmare. They knew that they must have fallen for one of Yunche's plots. Looking at the corpses lying on the ground around them, they gave a loud roar, and rushed forward furiously. But the collapsed 9 Profound Dipper formation could no longer be constructed. Even though they had rushed forward at the same time, their threat towards Yunche had already reduced substantially. In his current state, Yunche was only left with half the strength of his peak, but against these Sky Profound practitioners who did not have the 9 Profound Dipper formation, the pressure upon him had suddenly dropped. Dragon Fault danced, and Storm screamed, drawing people, one after another, into the whirlpool of death. Under the might of Yunche's sword, these Sky Profound practitioners whose names shook the blue wind were practically unable to get within 10 meters of Yunche. And if they came into slight contact with the Dragon Fault, a light hit would result in grievous injury, while a heavy one would result in a violent death. Before long, these Sky Profound practitioners were already flustered. They could not even save their own lives as each revealed expressions of utter despair. The sneer had completely vanished from Fen Dueching's face, and every muscle in his body was twitching. He stared widely and rigidly as Yunche killed each of the Burning Heaven clan's pillars of support one after another. Even more so, he was cutting off the Burning Heaven clan's lifelines one by one. His hands and feet were ice cold, and his teeth clenched tight as a wave of deep fear began spreading in his chest. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and ran like a lunatic towards Mortal Parting Heavenly Pavilion. Mortal Parting Heavenly Pavilion's door was kicked open. Fen Dueching's gaze was locked onto Xiao Lingxi's person firmly as he quickly rushed towards her. A figure appeared in a blur in front of him, and Fen Dueching blocked his path. His gaze was brimmed with coldness. "What are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do?" "Of course it's to take her life to Yunche." Fen Dueching spoke, deep and low. "Yunche was willing to come here for her, so it's evident that she's important to Yunche. I'll bring her before Yunche, and have him take his life in exchange for hers." Xiao Lingxi moved backwards, her back pressing tightly against the wooden windows while her eyes filled with fear. Fen Dueching's footsteps did not let up, and even his expression was still completely unfeeling and cold. "I've said that she's just a bait. That's all. This was the bottom line we agreed on in bringing her here. Other than that, nobody is allowed to touch her. Yunche has already killed more than 20 elders and pavilion masters, and the entire of the Burning Heaven clan is about to be buried in his hands, yet you're still shouting about your ridiculous bottom line." Scram! Fen Dueching's expression was sinister. Raising his right arm, he knocked Fen Dueching away roughly while grabbing towards Xiao Lingxi. "You're asking for death." Fen Dueching became enraged, as streaks of long fire chains shot out from his hands, winding firmly around Fen Dueching who was charging towards Xiao Lingxi. At the same time, his body rushed forward, as he threw himself forth like a fierce wolf. "The one who is causing death is you. You're a good-for-nothing trash who insists on assuming a lofty stance. In my eyes, you've always been just a ridiculous and pitiful clown. With just your abilities, do you think you're fit to stop me?" Bang! The chains of fire burst apart, as Fen Dueching and Fen Dueching began engaging in combat. Fen Dueching fueled his pressing desire to capture Xiao Lingxi in order to coerce Yunche, and Fen Dueching who was fueled by both his desire to protect Xiao Lingxi as well as his overflowing fury and murderous intent. The two brothers who had originally got along rather harmoniously were yet currently filled with murderous desires, their attacks incomparably vicious with no leeway in the least. Fen Jueqing's left arm and right hand were already injured heavily, and he was also injured internally as well. However, his strength was a realm greater than compared to Fen Jueqing's, and still very quickly pressed Fen Jueqing into a disadvantageous position. After a dozen or so exchanges, a tongue of flame hit Fen Jueqing right in his chest, throwing him far away. Fen Jueqing's back was smashed heavily onto the wall, causing the wall to break open as the wooden tables and chairs beside him had also rapidly caught on fire. Trash! Fen Jueqing smiled disdainfully, grabbing towards Xiao Lingxi yet again. Who did you say was trash? An enormous hand of flame surged up in fury, and smashed onto Fen Jueqing's face in an instant, forcing him back by 3 or 4 steps. Fen Jueqing also leapt over from the ground, throwing himself at Fen Jueqing like a thoroughly enraged wolf. You courting death? A terrifyingly sinister expression appeared on Fen Jueqing's face. With a roar, the flames on his body exploded into life. Fen Jueqing's gaze was fierce, and although his profound fire was far weaker than Fen Jueqing's, he wasn't inferior at all in terms of the imposing pressure. Even more so, his gaze was even colder than the cutting edge of a sword. Letting out low roars, he stubbornly obstructed Fen Jueqing's advancing steps. The skin and flesh on his hands were also being burned to crisp by Fen Jueqing's flames, yet he did not utter a single word, nor did he retreat by even half a step. The things that I, Fen Jueqing, wish to protect. Unless I die, otherwise. Don't even think of having it your way. Don't think I won't dare to kill you. You useless trash. Fen Jueqing's expression grew all the more malevolent, and his flames began devouring Fen Jueqing's flames even faster. Almost half of his arms had already been burnt enough to practically reveal his bones, but still he did not let up. The flames started to spread beyond his hands, arms. Xiao Lingxi stood by the wooden windows, her tender face had long been drained of color. Regarding Fen Jueqing, she was originally supposed to be filled with hatred towards him, as he was the one who had brought her and her father here, but he had protected her once and again. To the point where he would not hesitate to use his life to protect her. She did not understand just what this unfeeling, taciturn person was thinking from the bottom of his heart, but she had practically lost all her hatred towards him by then, and it had been replaced with a kind of complicated gratitude. Although her profound energy could not be compared to that of the two at all, it was enough for her to know that no matter how ferocious Fen Jueqing was, he would still not be able to restrain Fen Jueqing ultimately. Her gaze swept past, landing upon the wooden windows as she looked at the figure of the one who was struggling in battle, blood-soaked, for her. Suddenly, all her fears had vanished and an entrancingly beautiful smile appeared on her face. Little Che. You must think of me. Bang! With a palm strike, the wood windows were smashed into pieces as she swiftly leapt up, passing through the windows lithely. Closing her eyes, she allowed her body to fall. She was scared of dying. But if she was being used as hostage to capture Yun Che, as an element to endanger his life, she would rather choose to die. The sound of the wooden window shattering was completely masked by the ear-shattering rumbling that filled the entire Burning Heaven clan, unable to attract anyone's notice. However, as though a telepathic sense, Yun Che's gaze seemed to have been pulled by some shapeless thing, and subconsciously looked up. With a glance, he saw Xiao Lingxi's figure breaking out through the window. Yun Che's current sight power could be compared to an emperor profound expert, and could distinctly see blades of grass and plants over 300 meters away, but it was still not enough to clearly see a face over a kilometer away, and even the body shape could be roughly distinguished. However, the moment his gaze touched Xiao Lingxi's falling figure, his pupils instantly dilated as his heart crazily throbbed. In his mind, 2 words were heavily striking his soul. Little aunt? Even though he could not clearly see her face, her attire, nor her body figure, and could only see a hazy image, the name Little Aunt appeared in his sea of mind with incomparable intensity. Because he knows her far too well. For an entire 15 years, they grew up together, stayed together from morning to night, and was inseparable like the body and its shadow. The time he spent together with Xiao Lingxi even far surpassed that of Su Linga. Toward her appearance, personality, likes, gaze, thoughts, and even smell, he was familiar to the depths of his marrow. Even their souls had almost already intermeshed with each other long ago. Yun Che was entirely sure, even if his little aunt had magic from fairy tales cast upon her, and turned into a little animal or a plant, he would still be able to tell it was her right away. Little aunt? Falling from 200 meters of height wouldn't be able to harm practitioners above spirit profound realm, but Xiao Lingxi's profound strength had only barely entered nascent profound realm at present. Falling from such a height was entirely enough to cause a direct death. Yunche's eyes, after a split second of staring blankly, went bloodshot in an instant as all of his blood rushed to his head. With an explosive roar, he put away Dragon Fault. No longer caring about anything around him, he dashed over as if crazed. The Yunche, who was extremely ferocious that made them unable to even get close, was suddenly dispersed of all killing intent, revealing huge openings. Even that terrifying Emperor Profound Heavy Sword was put away. 3 Sky Profound Elders rushed forward, and their violent burning heaven blood claws simultaneously smashed onto Yunche's back. Yunche let out a grunt as blood leaked out of the side of his mouth, but borrowing the 3 Sky Profound Elders' attacks, he dashed forward with an even faster speed, and broke through all of the encirclement from the burning heaven elders. His eyes stared wide to the point of almost bursting, fixedly onto Xiao Lingxi, who was falling. His speed after putting away Dragon Fault became extremely fast, but to catch Xiao Lingxi before she plummeted to the ground with such a speed was simply impossible. 300 meters swiftly passed by under Yunche's feet, while Xiao Lingxi was already halfway to the ground. Below her was the impeccably tough marble surface. If she landed, there was almost no possibility of survival. Yunche's hands reached forward as painful howls sounded from his mouth. He had never before so crazily wished for time to stop right now. "Little aunt? Little aunt?" The husky shouts traveled to the plummeting Xiao Lingxi as if they were from a dream, and she slowly opened her eyes. The wind howling by her ears was intense and cold, like the voice of hell's god of death calling, yet a voice she was extremely familiar with and yearned for was also mixed in. Following the direction of that shout, her gaze turned to the side, and she hazily saw that silhouette dashing toward her as if gone insane, and touched his imperative, panicked and fearful gaze. Her heartstrings were heavily pulled, and the will to survive quickly birthed in her heart. Closing her eyes, she released all of her profound energy, and guarded her body. Xiao Lingxi's plummeting speed became faster and faster, and she would smash onto the cold and hard ground in less than 3 breaths of time. But between Yunche and her, there was still a distance so far that it was despairing. "Uga? Purgatory!" A beast-like roar flooded out from Yunche's throat, and the third gate forcefully opened. Instantaneously, red light appeared from his body, and all the profound energy in his body began to burn ragingly as if aflame, and all turned into power that crazily drove him forward. Even though Yunche's speed sharply increased, Xiao Lingxi neared toward the ground with an increasing velocity. Empyrean Dance of the Phoenix. Yunche's figure, as if turned into an arrow of flame, instantly dashed over an extremely long distance. Right after, his left arm reached out, and a flash of cyan light shot out like a shooting star. Profound Handle. Go! This streak of profound handle was instilled with almost all of his conviction and hope. His gaze tightly fixated onto the profound handle's trajectory that flew toward the falling Xiao Lingxi. At this moment, he already didn't have the spare concentration to notice that his current profound handle color was actually cyan. The profound handle was red-colored when in a normal state, orange-colored under the evil soul state, and yellow-colored under the burning heart state. Following this, the profound handle ought to be green under purgatory. Yet the profound handle Yunche released at this moment was shockingly cyan. The same cyan color as Yun Songhai. The profound handle's speed far surpassed Yunche himself, and rocketed forward like a streaming light passing by in a flash. Yet in Yunche's eyes, the travel path was so terribly slow. The flow of time had seemingly slowed down substantially in Yunche's eyes at this moment. With wide eyes, he watched Xiao Lingxi fall bit by bit and watched the profound handle nearing little by little. At last, when there wasn't even 2 feet between Xiao Lingxi and the ground, the profound handle that carried all of his hope also rushed below her at this moment. Bang! The profound handle crashed onto the cliffside, and a wave of not too ferocious power instantly exploded. The storm it created shifted Xiao Lingxi's falling trajectory, and flung her horizontally outwards like a falling leaf in the wind. And Yunche also arrived in a swoop, his 2 arms tightly held onto Xiao Lingxi. At that instant, it was as if he had saved the entire world. Bang! Another loud noise sounded as the head of Yunche, who didn't have time to stop violently, crashed onto the stone cliff, and he tumbled onto the ground while hugging Xiao Lingxi. In his embrace, Xiao Lingxi was tightly protected by his profound energy, and didn't take any damage. He swiftly sat up, his arms holding Xiao Lingxi tight. In the next instant, his gaze directly met hers. The two froze at the same time, and the scene seemed to have froze forever at that instant. They grew up together, accompanied each other day and night, and had never separated for even a day. Yet that was 3 years ago. And the 3 years of separation, to them, was as long and unbearable as though 3 centuries. Xiao Ling's complexion was very pale, her breathing was also extremely weak. Even though her body didn't fall to the ground, the impact from falling and the as gentle as possible impact from the profound handle's energy made the profound energy and aura in her body become chaotic while also considerably injuring her innards. If not for the yearning to take a glance at Yunche, she would have already fainted. She stared at Yunche blankly, her gaze clouded and misty as if she was in an illusory dream. Slowly, her eyes that had been previously filled with the will to die began to shine with more and more expressions. Joy, tenderness, moved, satisfaction, gratification. She felt herself being hugged tightly in his embrace. Back then, just how familiar and usual that was, but this time, was far too long ago from last time. Lying down in his arms quietly just like this, she stopped hearing all other sounds, stopped feel any pain and weakness on her body, and forgot all the danger she had just encountered. In her heart, only ease, warmth, and happiness that only he could give was left. The corner of her lips curled up bit by bit, and her snow jade-like hand lifted little by little, gently covering Yunche's face. From within her lips, a voice like the gentle breeze flowed, "Little Che. You've finally come back." This one light sentence of a few words had actually made Yunche distinctively feel a wave of care and longing as great as the ocean. At that instant, Yunche almost erupted with tears on the spot. And Xiao Ling's hand had also fallen at this moment, as her entire person completely went unconscious. 3 years without meeting, Xiao Lingxi had grown taller, yet her waist became even more slender and soft. Holding her in his arms, she felt as light as a bundle of silk, without any sense of weight. She had grown up, from a 15-year-old naive girl, to an 18-year-old graceful young woman. Yet, she had become so thin. In these 3 most valuable years of a person's life, what she had endured was unbearable loneliness and miserableness, as well as longing and yearning that accompanied her throughout day and night. Yunche stood up, and silently raised his head. On the high-up mortal-parting heavenly pavilion, he saw 2 figures that were looking down from above. One was Fen Juechen, and the other was Fen Juechen. A surge of ferocious killing intent released from his body, the resentment in his heart was monstrously undulating like the ocean's waves. However, he forcefully suppressed all of his killing intent and hatred. Holding Xiao Lingxi in his embrace, he summoned out the already exhausted snow phoenix beast, and rushed straight toward the east. He no longer wished to go on fighting. He only wanted to take little aunt safely away from here, as soon as possible. Whether it was rage or resentment, even if they were millions of times more intense, they were not the slightest importance compared to Xiao Lingxi. Just as Yunche saved Xiao Lingxi, Burning Heaven Clan also had a huge movement. "Deploy the Heaven Fire Star Burning Formation right now!" Fen Duanhuan roared. Seeing the miserable scene of elders and pavilion masters' corpses scattered about, he could no longer stay calm, as his voice became distorted and violent. Fen Moji, who was similarly still shaken, was greatly startled by this command from Fen Duanhuan, hastily said, But Clan Master, Heaven Fire Star Burning Formation should only be used when the sect encounters an enemy that could cause us to perish. Once it's used, it needs an entire 300 years to construct again. Is the enemy we are facing right now not one that could cause us to perish?" Fen Duanhuan madly roared with his teeth tightly clenched, "Yunche must die. Otherwise, if he leaves today, our Burning Heaven clan will certainly meet the disaster of our end not long after. Quickly, go! Why, yes. All of you, scram!" Yunche rode the Snow Phoenix and swiftly flew. Because the Snow Phoenix was already in a thoroughly exhausted state from rushing non-stop for 3,000 kilometers, after being summoned again, its flight speed wasn't very quick, and its flight altitude was also only less than 30 meters. Yet in the place he rushed toward, there weren't any elders to greet him. Instead, they all hastily fled far away as if to let him leave as he wished. While the current him was greatly exhausted of his strength, and also had a person in his bosom, it was supposedly the best chance for the Burning Heaven clan to attack him. At this time, Jasmine's warning suddenly resounded, an attack-based profound formation ready to be launched suddenly appeared to your front. The profound formation's might is enough to annihilate someone at the later stages of Emperor Profound Realm. Jasmine's words made Yunche's heart abruptly turn cold. Annihilate a late-stage Emperor Profound Realm? Within the Burning Heaven clan, there was actually such a terrifying profound formation hidden. As expected, the 4 major sects' heritage couldn't be discounted. However, Jasmine's tone eased right after, and let out a disdainful sneer. This profound formation is a pure, profound fire formation. Not long after Jasmine's voice fell, a deep purple-colored enormous profound formation suddenly emerged from the ground below Yunche and began to quickly spin. On the edge of the profound formation, over 30 deep purple pillars of fire suddenly surged up towards the skies. Every single fire pillar was 5 feet thick, and over 100 meters high, tightly encircling Yunche and the unconscious Xiao Lingxi in the center. Episode 45 is end here. Next episode coming tomorrow. Thanks for watching.